Okay, hi everyone. Good evening and welcome to today's Scrutiny Children's Services Review Group. I shall wait a moment because we seem to have a technical issue. Okay, take two. I can still hear echo.
Hello, testing. Marie, do you know what to do? Actually. Yesterday earlier. Just give me a second. Okay, Chair, can you try again?
Testing. Brilliant. Good. Take three. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Scrutiny Children's Service Review Group. I'm Councillor Lee Bridgen, Chair. I'll just run through the meeting preamble. So the meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the public part of the meeting will be available on the Council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Remote participants joining the meeting using Teams, please turn cameras on when speaking and use the hands up icon to indicate a question or comment, and turn microphones and cameras off when finished. Those of you in the chamber, please remember to switch microphones on when speaking and speak directly into the microphone, and turn off when finished. And as always, please make sure that mobile phones are turned off or switched in silent mode. If you need to take a call, please leave the room and return when you've finished. Okay, on to the agenda. So the first item is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for absence have been received from Katie Thompson, the primary school representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you put your hand up?
Not on apologies, but I've just been told by Councillor Umiali that the screen is still black. Is that on purpose? Like she can't see anything? So are we going to try and resolve that? Thank you. Thank you. Just so Councillor Ali online knows, we are trying to resolve the issue right now.
Thank you.
Okay, perhaps if we proceed up to at least up to the actual reports, and if we haven't got the on-screen view by then, we'll take a break until that's resolved. So moving on to item 2, which is the minutes of the last meeting held on 26th of March 2025. The minutes are presented on pages 5 to 14 of the agenda pack. Are there any comments or corrections? No comments or corrections, so I think we can take those as approved. Thank you. Moving on to item 3, disclosures of interest. I will start by saying that I'm a local authority governor of Somrees Junior School. Councillor Mahmood Hussain?
Yeah, Downside School.
Councillor Fry?
Teacher at Eton High School.
Thank you. Yep.
Wigmore Primary School, Vice Chair and Parent Governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Governor for Dallow Primary.
Thank you. Any others? Yep.
Governor for Downside Primary.
Thank you. I think that's cool. Everyone good? Moving on to the next item 4, which is urgent business. Nothing that I'm aware of.
No, Chair, we haven't received any. Thank you.
And as item 5, references from committees and other bodies.
None received, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Under item 6, which is the chair's update. So just a few points. So this will be the last meeting of this municipal year. A briefing note on the housing allocations policy and care levers will be circulated separately to members prior to the executive on the 2nd of June. And this was agreed at the group leaders meeting as the item is not expected to be contentious. The reference from the group from the last meeting on school and college transport was considered by the exec on 22nd of April 2025, who noted the report. And just also just in relation to a slight change to the order of the agenda that we're going to follow today, because questions from item 7 may in a way be answered by the presentation and the report to item 8, we will be switching those. So we'll take item 8 before item 7. Okay. So we've got up to the stage where we need to move on to reports. I understand that we're still not technically able to show the presentation on the MS Teams connection yet. We'll just take a short break for a few minutes while I find out how quickly this can be resolved. Paul, does the report under item 8 have a PowerPoint presentation or anything? So I think we could possibly progress with that if the issue with the PowerPoint on the connection isn't resolved. We'll just wait for Eunice to come back, and then we'll progress to item 8 if that's okay.
Yes.
And if that's okay with you on the line, Councillor Ali.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you. So we will progress with item 8, which is on pages 20 to 22 of your agenda pack. And that's with I think with Paul Wagstaff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Items 7 and 8 are co-related in many ways. I think it's been decided to put 8 first to give the context behind why the compliance has fallen behind. I'm going back to last November, or going back a year now, and there's been a challenge in recruiting educational psychologists. I've got my colleague Joe Summers, who's our principal educational psychologist and head of inclusion, who will explain the situation that we've been through. And we've been through various processes, including ARC committee, to look at changes in the benchmarking of educational psychologist salaries to be able to attract and retain. And of course, there's clear implications around the number of educational psychologists with the number of assessments that they can make. And if we don't have the psychologists, then the assessments are delayed, and hence the compliance, which is in report number 7. It has that implication. But I'm going to hand over to my colleague Joe to just summarise, and then we'll be able to answer any questions that people may have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, as Paul's outlined, obviously the two papers are clearly linked in that there is a statutory requirement for educational psychologists to provide advice as part of the Education Healthcare Plan assessment. So they have to provide their advice within 6 weeks in order to us to complete the assessment within a 20-week timescale. So obviously one is impacting on the other, and I'll go on to say the impact on compliance. In terms of the paper, obviously it just outlines the difficulties, as Paul said, in terms of recruitment of EPs, and reflects a national picture here in Luton, with many EPs choosing now to work privately rather than employed by local authorities for more favourable working conditions and improved rates of pay. We have taken a number of steps to increase recruitment of EPs within Luton. We're not alone, as I say, in terms of other local authorities. We did some benchmarking with other local authorities and we increased the salaries. So we had a competitive salary in terms of the range of the grades. And we've gone out to advert twice. We are out to advert again for EPs as well. But so far, we haven't seen the EPs just aren't out there in terms of us attracting them. We have been working to secure, and again, this is linked to the second paper, agency EPs, which again, many local authorities are relying on to fulfil their statutory obligations now. We have also set up an approved providers list of EPs so that we can ensure that we actually supplement the substantive team in terms of our capacity to deliver the HCPs. We're also looking at trainee EP model. We are aware from having trainees in the past that once they're within a local authority, they tend to stay, and we're able to attract people who live within the locality, which is really positive for us. So actually, we're looking at also employing some trainee EPs so that we can do a model of sort of grow your own EPs within Luton as well. An overview. If there's any questions, happy to take them.
Thank you. So go to Councillor Twine and Councillor Mahmood. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for the report. It was quite a worrying report, I think, when we read it, but not a shock to us, I think, because we know it's been an ongoing problem, not just for Luton, but for lots of people. One of the things that I was a bit concerned about was the amount of agency we were taking, and I was wondering if it's possible to get some figures for what those agency costs are compared to, say, if we had people on our payroll, just to get some idea of the impact that is having on us as a council. And I was also wondering, you talked about getting the trainees in, but I'm sure you must be feeling there, as I do, that there's a great danger that as soon as they're qualified, they move off and become go into that private sector, which seems to be something that is drawing people away from the public sector. I did note that in particular, they were wanting more flexible hours, and I was just wondering as well, are we able to offer a more flexible approach to their working hours to help with recruitment or retention? But I am very pleased to see that at least you're trying to up those wages and do what you can.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of benefits for working within a local authority, and obviously I try and emphasise those as well in terms of the variety of work that we can offer. So we are in a better position than many of our neighbouring local authorities because we have a traded service as well. We provide traded service to schools, and early intervention work is really popular with EPs. Just in terms of the cost, it's a differential cost. We have, in terms of clearing the backlog, secured some funding to pay for agency EPs as a short-term measure. Longer term, our approved providers list will allow us to be able to, support the substantive team going forward. There is a cost. Obviously, our EPs work in a preventative way as well as providing EHCP advice. So there is an increased cost to the council. Again, as I say, many local authorities are in the position now of having a budget for their locums alongside the substantive team. And I can provide more information on that. We have, as I say, secured the funding to feed the backlog. And what we need to do is, make sure we've got the sustainable model going forward. Just in terms of the trainee EPs are required, once they've completed their training, to spend 3 years within local authority practice. So actually, in terms of, and also in terms of their breadth of experience, so no agency or locums agency would take on a trainee EP. I wouldn't take a trainee EP as an agency as well. And there is a stipulation in terms of the funding. They quickly caught onto that in terms of the training, that actually they do need to work for a local authority EP as well. And actually the role of the EP and the EP assessment is currently under review as well. So we're looking to hear what next.
That's great, thank you. So do we know how that's going to impact us moving forward then? Is there any sort of idea?
Well, yes, in terms of our timeliness and our capacity, yes. So we've got another full-time EP starting in September. We're out to advert for the trainee EPs now. So going forward, the recovery, which I'll talk about in the second paper, is underway. So we are clearing that backlog. Our challenge now is to make sure we've got sufficient capacity to continue to keep up to date with that.
Thank you. Just one final point then, going back to that appointment for September. Is that a trainee that's coming in?
No, that's a fully qualified EP. Interestingly enough, it's somebody who completed their first year trainee placement with us. And what we find is once our trainees have been with us, then they like to stay with us, but it's just attracting them in the first place. So we're positive about that. That's a trainee that was with us on placement the first year is now coming as a fully qualified EP.
Excellent, that's very good. Maybe that extra incentive of the money helped as well then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Paul wanted to come in on that as well.
And just also to add that as part of the recovery package that we've put together, which will be in the next paper, there was additional funding to increase the number of educational psychologists so that we had sufficient in terms of the future as well. So it's not necessarily just continually trying to catch up. So there's an investment that was being put in of about 1.3 million over 2 years, and that's to increase the number of educational psychologists so we've got greater capacity so that we don't fall behind. Thank you.
Councillor Mahmood Hussain.
Okay, in terms of the training, have we learned anything? Where have we done the social work academy for the children's services in before, which has worked very effectively and really managed to get permanent social workers? Did we try anything like that in this particular case? Because, as you know, there is a national shortage of educational psychologists, so it's not that you can just go there and even if you ask a market supplement, you're still not going to have a huge success in trying to get a fully qualified educational psychologist.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the training model, there is a small number of institutions that train EPs and the government only provide a certain number of places. So we're bound by the institutions in terms of the number that they're training each year to actually secure those trainees. So it's slightly different in terms of the training and they have to, as trainees, they have to spend 3 days in the local authority, obviously need to do the training at the institution as well. So it's slightly different in terms of the social work academy because it's a doctorate, it's a 3 years training course.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ali Khan. I've covered your point. Good. Any other questions? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that report and covering the questions raised. We'll move now on, as Paul said, closely linked to this to the next item, which is item number 7. Which is the percentage of educational health and care plans issued within the 20 weeks, excluding exceptions, and that's on pages 15 to 19 of your agenda pack. I think that's with Paul again, is it? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, just to introduce this report, and again, there are connections between the previous one and this. People will see that the actual compliance in terms of completion of the EHCP within the 20 weeks deadline has gradually been on the decline since the end of COVID, and that is linked primarily with an increasing demand coming through at the same time around the capacity issues, which we've already highlighted from Joe in the previous report. It is quite important to note that within this, and it was raised at Overview and Scrutiny Board, in terms of that compliance, that's why we decided and felt it was important to bring this report here, so that you understand what actions are taking place to try and cover that backlog and get back up with the compliance within the 20 weeks, but also what's happening to those pupils who might be awaiting their final EHCP, because there's obviously a programme in place that we're providing to provide that waiting and that support, so they're not relying on that end of EHCP publication before the support gets in place. But I'll pass over to Joe who'll summarise, and then we'll answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, as I say, obviously the two papers are linked, and this second paper provides an overview. You'll see in terms of our timeliness, so that's obviously our compliance to complete an education, health and care plan within the 20 weeks time, that it's dropped over time. And section 7 outlines those that win timescale and those that are beyond 20 weeks. We have a recovery plan in place, a multi-agency recovery plan. One is sustainability, obviously a key theme of that. And the sustainability aspect is what I've talked about, making sure we've got enough educational psychologists to meet the demands coming through, and enough staff within the SEND assessment team to actually make sure that they're processing those plans. More plans means more casework. So it's not just the initial plans that we're doing. Obviously, we need to maintain and annually review all those plans as well as they've increased. So as Paul said, we have secured funding for 6 additional staff for the SEND assessment team, and also for the EP service, and we are just onboarding those. The SEND assessment team, it's slightly easier to recruit staff. We are out to advert now to increase their capacity going forward. So maintaining, obviously, securing a sustainable service going forward, so we can keep in line with the demand that's coming through. Another key part, obviously, is better support for waiting with our families. So while they're waiting to be allocated for an educational psychologist, we have secured a system of contacting them regularly and making sure that they're updated, and talking to the schools about support that we're putting in place for those families as well, with support from our inclusion service and our specialists more generally. As I say, the recovery plan is taking a little bit of time in terms of getting that underway, and I think that's why we're in perhaps the position we are now. The agency backlog of EPs, we're just onboarding those now, so we should see those coming through within the next few weeks. 1st of May is when I'll start to quality assure all of those that are coming through, and the team and I are ready to do that. So from that, obviously, there'll be a little bit of delay in terms of pickup, because it's a 20-week process, and there's time for obviously the families to respond. But as I say, that's all. We've been through procurement for the agencies. We've got our approver provider list starting at the beginning of June. So we're in a good position now going forward to see that increase in compliance.
So I think Paul wants to come in on that as well.
And just to add, one of the issues around waiting, and obviously children who are awaiting the outcome of the EHCP, we've also put in a model whereby funding for the EHCP will be backdated to the 20th week if it takes longer, so that schools can begin to put support in place, knowing that they will get the funding when the EHCP is complete. And it's important to note, because we do a very rigorous triaging of assessments at the very start of the process. So most of the children who we agree to assess then do end up with an EHCP. So therefore, it's actually ensuring that the schools do get the support at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, that's an important point to note, that it will be backdated. So yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions and points from me before I open up to the floor. And I've seen lots of hands up. I'll probably need to ask you to raise your hands again so that I can capture everyone. But just in relation to the recommendation, so there's a recommendation that this will be tracked by a overview and scrutiny board. I have been in contact with the chair of OSB, and we'd certainly be agreeable to that being tracked via OSB. I think it's on the regular dashboard that they look at. And I think, obviously, if it becomes apparent that things are going wrong, then possibly it'll be referred back. So happy with that. Just who sits on this strategic partnership board? Just a question from me. Who actually sits on the SEND strategic partnership board?
The SEND Strategic Partnership Board has a broad range of our partners, including health, social care, education, schools, and also officers joint commissioning. So it has a broad range. And Javaria Hussain, Councillor Hussain, is also a member of that group.
Okay, thank you. Right, so if I could ask everyone to put their hands up. So we have Councillor Councillor Mahmood. No, sorry, I'm just okay. Yeah. That's the Councillor Peckham, yeah. There you go. Right, so apologies if I'm not getting you in order as to when you raised your hands. We'll start off with Councillor Mahmood Hussain.
Thank you. Can I just ask you, this must be probably a mistake, in the bullet point at 12, where it says the contract timeline for EHP starts on the 1st of April 2002. I think it's been, yeah, so it's already started 2025. Okay, so certainly not. In terms of the increase, how long will it be before we get this, the backlog, which has gone on for a considerable amount of time, with this contract of 165, that they'll be able to clear that? Is there a timeline?
Sorry. As I say, because this is a 20-week process, so at the moment, in terms of those waiting, we've got 4 weeks. The agency EPs have got to complete their advice because they need 6 weeks is the statutory guidance. We've given 4 weeks to complete that. Then there'll be, obviously, the information will be collated together. Then there will be parents' time to respond and things as well. But we should see those coming through. Certainly into the autumn term, we'll be in a much better position in terms of those. We should see the timeliness increasing. We have been monitored quite closely by the DfE as well in regard to that. So we are obviously providing that feedback as well to make sure that we're moving forward. But yeah, no, we should see that into the autumn term and coming through with clearing the backlog. The contract with the agencies for 4 months to clear the backlog.
Right. In terms of that, because we are slightly above the national average in terms of our the increase in the EHCP. So will that have an impact on that? Because the increase is above the national average for us in Luton rather than the rest of the country. So will that make an impact as well?
Not in terms of if we've got enough capacity to meet the needs, then that should be, as long as we've got enough capacity to meet the need coming through, that shouldn't make a difference. We are working with schools as well to make sure that what they're providing is SEND support. So that's their usual funding mechanisms for schools, that they're providing what they need and that we're intervening early as well. So we're not getting to the point of needing an education, health and care plan. So we're very clear to work on that as well. It's not about reducing EHCPs as staff as such, but it is about making sure that they're using their delegated resources in the way that we would expect.
Yeah, because it's a very anxious time for the parents to get that support as early as possible.
Exactly.
And it is very emotional indeed. If the longer they wait, the more impact has not only on the child, but the parents as well. So we need to prioritize that.
We're very aware of that. And that's why we're regularly in touch with our families that are in a position of being waiting to be allocated to an EP to make sure they are supported and the children's needs to be met. As I say, obviously increasing the funding means that there shouldn't be a barrier for schools putting that support in before the plan is completed.
Thank you.
Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for answering, I think, 6 of my points for this report from the previous report. So that was really helpful. Thank you very much. And thank you to you too, Paul. You've answered some things that I was wondering about. What I am wondering, though, is how we are dealing with the impact that these delays are having. And I know they're not issues that we have much control over. Because obviously the law states that, delays are not an excuse. And I'm just wondering how many parents there have actually complained after if they've waited 20 weeks or more. Are they going to IPSIA and getting advice and complaining to us? And are we having any problems because of it with raising issues with Ofsted and CQC? And if there are any of these issues, how we're doing to mitigate what might happen in the event of these complaints that might be coming around?
So we have very few complaints in terms of waiting. We do have some tribunal appeals, but we've got a very low rate of appeals in Luton. We do pride ourselves on working early with families to try and resolve difficulties. And I think this is the approach that we've taken in this case, that actually we reach out to the families. So I personally call them at 12 weeks if they're waiting and talk it through that. They receive a telephone call from myself or colleague at 6 weeks to talk that through. We do also contact the school and make sure that, as I say, they are supported and signposted to other services. So the complaints, we have had some individual families contact us directly when they're obviously concerned, and you know, it's, as we've heard, an anxious time, but we've managed to put support in place, a reassurance. We also have very inclusive schools, so often the support is there, but actually the school aren't able to sustain it longer term. So actually what they do when they apply for an education healthcare plan, they have to provide us with evidence that this child's needs are above and beyond what you'd expect within a mainstream school, and they have to evidence very clear on a provision map about the provision they're putting in place. So often the provision is there, but the school aren't able to sustain it longer term, if that makes sense. So that means that the support is already there. If it's not, and if funding is a barrier, then obviously we have those discussions as well. But that's the approach we've taken. And as I say, so far we've been able to work really close with our families to, you know, ensure that we are working together and meet these. But obviously it's a challenging time.
Thank you. Yeah, I do totally understand, because working in a school,
yes, of course,
it does make a difference. It does seem like the fact that you're so aware of what the problems are and keeping those communication channels open has been really beneficial.
I think with our schools as well. So I have a Senko forum, which has about 70 Senkos attend, which happens regularly, and I'm constantly providing updates in terms of the process, the recovery plan, progress towards that, etc. So I think they feel reassured that, and in terms of support, and they will contact us. We've got good relationships with our schools that will reach out and say if a child is waiting and they're finding it really hard to meet the needs.
Thank you for that. Yeah, because that reaching out is that really important thing. So thank you for that reassurance.
Thank you. So Tasleen Aslam. Sorry, can you turn your microphone on?
Carrying on from those questions with regards to delays, you know, there is an issue in Luton with educational psychologists. As a result, EHCPs are delayed. However, what happens to where parents are willing to go down the private route? I've been led to believe that although parents may choose to go down the private route, they still can't get anywhere because they have to be seen through the authority EPs. Is that true?
No. So in terms of any advice that comes into us, any professional advice, if the professional is registered with the Healthcare Professionals Council, they're, you know, fully fledged educational psychologists, because there is obviously some practitioners that are providing advice that may be out of the realm of their scope of expertise. We do take professional reports on board. When we do the assessment process, we would consider professional reports alongside a local authority in terms of perspective, but we would consider those. We can't rule those out. And obviously, when we're in an appeal situation, parents routinely provide private reports to provide evidence to the judge about what their child needs. So no, we would always take those into consideration. Same with a diagnosis. If it's been carried out by a private professional in an appropriate way, in line with NICE guidance, we would always take that on board.
Because this is a reoccurring theme in my governor meetings regularly. You know, there's needs, but those needs can't really go anywhere because as you just said, you know, those that are really severe are being prioritized just because of the lack of educational psychologists and just the waiting times.
Yeah, we are committed though still in Luton, and we're really, really fortunate that we've still got a service that works in a preventative way. So early interventions. So those children which you're describing that are maybe at SEND support, but their needs aren't complex enough for an EHCP, that they don't fall through the gap. So we are still working at that level in Luton as well. And it's really important we preserve that for the EPs, because to get upstream and to intervene early is really important to prevent the later impact and cost later on, and impact for the family and the young person as well. So that's the model that we use within Luton. And it means that often, if we're working with a young person, when we get to the point of education, health and care plan, if we need to, we've already got a lot of information, which is the model that we really would hope for. And the families already know us as well and have worked with us. But yeah, no, I do take on board your point. And it's often raised with schools about those children that maybe don't meet the threshold for an EHCP, but still would benefit from the advice of an EP. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, can you turn your microphone on again? Sorry.
When they come to secondary,
Yeah.
and I am a secondary school teacher, and there's so many children whose needs have not been overlooked
Yeah.
at that primary level, and it's so much more difficult
Yeah.
to get EHCPs in those later years.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak to you at length about this separately, but in terms of transition, we're doing a lot of work around transition to support, because we support that gap as well, but also our work that we're doing at the moment, which was due to launch in the autumn term, around ordinary available provision. We're providing a document, guidance for Luton schools that suggests what we'd expect to be put in place for a child within their delegated resources as well. So we're trying to strengthen the offer at SEND support in our schools as well, to make sure that
Thank you. Just one more question.
Yeah.
With regards to, you spoke about a complaints process. How accessible is that complaints process?
Understanding of the process. Sorry, I didn't catch the first bit.
Complaints process. How accessible is it to parents of students?
The EHCP process?
No, the complaints process.
The complaints, sorry, I didn't hear the first bit.
Complaints process.
Thank you, sorry. The complaints process. So in terms of when a parent or a young person, if they're older than 16, apply for an education, health and care plan assessment or a school, we have very clear legal letters that set out very clearly. They are accessible in terms of making sure that our parents and carers understand them, and they are available in different languages in terms of support. But they outline very clearly the complaints procedure around our complaints procedure, and also the tribunal appeal and the legal framework for the SEND code of practice as well. I mean, we're always working on accessibility. We're always trying to co-produce guidance and information with our parents to make sure they understand, but they should be very aware of schools complaints procedure and our own local authority procedure as well.
Ashish Katia.
Thank you very much.
Point of order. It's just occurred to me that because we're normally live streamed and the screen isn't working, would it be worth people mentioning their name before they start talking, just for transparency's sake, if it is going to be live streamed without the actual physical faces there?
I'm happy with that. I mean, is this sort of impacting the live stream on YouTube as well as on? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, perhaps if we could do that. So start with you, Ashish.
Also introduce in what capacity you're in as well. I think that would be good.
Yeah, no worries at all. Okay, so hi, Ashish Kadia, the parent governor of Wigmore Primary School, and I can't remember what my official capacity is, forgive me. Parent governor representative. Is that me? Can you hear me at all that way? I'll move across in a minute, sorry. Okay. Get to the question now, sorry. Really good report. Thank you so much. Really, really helpful and insightful. I'm going to try and find the page. I had my questions written down now. Okay, so we've got some information on table 1 that shows us the increase in EHCPs over a 5-year period. So I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. So has there been an increase in the teams that are responsible for trying to manage this, recognizing that there's a backlog? So that was the first question.
Okay, can you use your microphone, please?
Sorry. Do you need me to say my name as well? No. Okay, reporting officer. Okay, that's fine. So in terms of as I outlined previously, there wasn't enough capacity within the team, so we saw this growing demand. We have now, as I say, going forward this year, secured additional funding to recruit those staff that are just coming on board. But in terms of caseloads, for example, for AHCP officers. As the number was increasing, the staff number wasn't increasing, hence our difficulties in keeping in line with our assessments. But say much more positive picture going forward in terms of our recruitment campaign as part of the recovery plan.
Sorry, I know it sounded like an obvious question, didn't it, really? So I think that because the reason why is obviously when you look at the number of cases per officer for the SEND assessment officers, for example, what I was interested in is sort of what's a typical caseload for a SEND assessment officer. I don't know whether you have that to hand at all. So, because I'm looking at it going, wow, that looks high, completely 466. And then there's someone on long-term sick leave, for example, 560. What's the target, for example, for case?
Well, it's much higher. We'd be a couple of hundred less than that in terms of national caseloads. I mean, it differs differently between different local authorities, and that we have a two model. We have a case officer, and then we have an EHCP coordinator as well. So we've got two roles, but we are aware we're way over national average in terms of caseload numbers, and that's because capacity of the team hasn't kept in line with demand and finalised plans.
Paul Wagstaff, Director of Education, do you want to come in on that?
Yes, just a point of clarification. Although we've not been able to increase, that doesn't mean we haven't been trying. And I think with educational psychologists, certainly for over a year, we were raising this issue and actually went through different processes, market supplements first, to try and make them more attractive. So we had to test that first. That didn't work. So therefore, that's when we've gone to regrading to then go out again. So the approach to try and increase the capacity has been going on for some time, but there are various processes that we've had to try first before actually we've got the agreement to actually increase the salary range in competition with others. I think the other point to make is that the SENDAT team went through a major organisational change programme in 2023, and of course as part of that the change was very much within the existing resources, and it was rescoped to try and create additional capacity by repurposing some of those posts. So that did work for a while, but with the increasing demand, it very quickly got out of step. Hence, that's why we're recruiting now.
So that's a really, really helpful clarification. So thank you. And I think the final point really is from in terms of managing expectations of this group and others and stakeholders involved, which is the compliance going forward. So I think you tried to answer earlier as well, but even with the interventions and everything that you're putting in place, we're still not likely to be compliant, I'm assuming, within the next year. But the aspiration is to get there. But can I conclude that from what you've said so far?
Just say we are compliant in some cases. It's the actual numbers of assessments and EHCPs that are not meeting that compliance. But you've got the figures up until February. I do know that the March figures have increased slightly. So I think there's an element of a turnaround. But we have also seen nationally a decline in terms of the ability to complete within the time frame. But we are well below that. So we know we've got some work to do, but we've certainly got that plan in place.
Just in terms of the national average, it is 50%. So, but we are, we aim to be higher than that. So, but we will see an increase, 100% in the next year, as long as we make sure that we've got a sustainable model going forward and we're able to recruit in the way that we would like. I don't foresee that being a difficulty, but it is, as I say, making sure that we can recruit in the way that we'd like and make sure that we've got the correct capacity, so we don't fall behind in the same way. We will have an increase in capacity in answer to your first question, so I'm hopeful that will improve and we won't be in the same position we were in terms of the backlog.
Again, they're really, really helpful, so thank you. And please don't take the questions as critical, more of a kind of how can we manage expectations going forward, recognising it's a real big challenge, so thank you.
Councillor Begum?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that go on from our peers across the chambers. With regards to all of what we're talking about in terms of assessments and things like that and caseload, what we've been discussing so far is those that actually get assessed and qualify perhaps and are waiting for an educational psychologist to see them to give them a formal diagnosis, but we know that there is something there. What is the number of people that are actually making that initial application in terms of wanting an assessment, and how are we managing those numbers? Because I know that not all applications qualify to be assessed by a case officer initially, or am I wrong in the way I'm thinking? I'm just trying to think of the actual process from the start to when it gets to the educational psychologist?
So in terms of this report, obviously the scope of this report is compliance. So it's those that agreed for an EHCP and completed within 20 weeks. Now, we have 6 weeks to make a decision, okay, and we are quite compliant. In fact, we're near 100% in terms of getting the agreement back to parents and carers and schools about whether we'll assess or not. If a young person isn't at the level we would expect in terms of going forward for the assessment, we would, again, we collect a range of data, information from the school progress over time to look at that. We would then have a way forward meeting with the family to discuss why that was the case, and there will be a meeting to then think about putting in support going forward as well. So we have quite a robust process in terms of that as well. I have to say our schools are very supportive with families in terms of putting applications together, and so it is quite a robust process in terms of considering that. The other thing to note, you mentioned about diagnosis. A diagnosis is a health term, so an EP wouldn't necessarily diagnose a young person, but what their role is to outline the needs in relation to a diagnosis or not as well. So, yeah.
Do we capture that initial data then? Because
we do. I haven't got it to hand, but we do in terms of number of requests coming forward and those that don't proceed to an assessment. We do, but yeah. And as I say, sometimes we ask for more information because there's information missing, and we'll go back and collate that and then reconsider the request.
So you can imagine that this is obviously sensitive information that a parent perhaps has to disclose, and there's always that element of judgment involved. So again, it's kind of what I found is I've spoken to a number of parents who have done an initial sort of assessment and application with the school, but not being quite upfront with the severity of what they are actually facing with this child, purely because of obviously stigma, judgment. Already the child's, in a lot of cases, labelled as the naughty child, doesn't really engage in the normal lunchtime activities because they have to go to emotional regulation clubs and things like that. But once they've gone through to the initial assessment, it's come back saying that, sorry, you don't qualify for an assessment and we're not going to do anything with it, go back to your school and what have you. And there has been a number of parents that have had to go through the GP route, which for them has taken a lot longer. So then it's kind of like we're delaying by default the whole process. So somebody that may have perhaps had a bit more assistance and a bit more help and support with this particular child has had to wait that little bit longer because they've not sort of, I understand obviously from your point of view, there's not much you can do in terms of telling them to be a little bit more honest and open with what they are perhaps disclosing, but there is always that element of that point of judgment. So if you leave a parent to fill it in on their own, most likely they won't be filling it in or even thinking of it from that perspective, because for them that is normal behavior. It is normal for their child to go to bed maybe at 10, 11 at night and wake up multiple times and then wake up again at 6 in the morning and cause complete havoc. For them, that's just the normal. So for some parents, because they can't see what is different from their normal, it's really hard to write down that, oh, my child does this, my child does that, and despite their age and what have you. So it's kind of like, is there any way that we can perhaps make that assessment process a little bit more targeted in terms of the questions that are asked so that it provides a bit more detail? And can we, rather than say to the parent via the school, here's the form, I've emailed it to you, fill it in, send it back to us, we'll add our bits as a school and then we'll send it off. Rather than do it that way, is there no way of kind of encouraging the school to do it together with the parent?
That would be best practice, and that would be something we would challenge our schools on, Senkos on, in terms of asking a parent to, I have come across it, to go away and fill it in and then bring it back to us. It should be done collaboratively with the school and support. And obviously we do signpost to Sendias, our independent advice service for parents as well, to help them complete that as well. So if there is a situation, sometimes we will get a request from, obviously parents can request, and there is limited information from the school. We will go back to the school and say this needs to be done and co-produced with the family and supported with the family as well, because obviously to get the right information to the panel to make that decision, we need to make sure that we work with that. So that's a helpful point. Thank you. I'll take that back. But we do challenge the schools on that in terms of a parent having to complete something. And as you rightly say, write about something that may be very emotive for themselves and their family. Yeah.
I think sometimes it is a case that we've become a little bit complacent in the sense that, oh, the parent can speak English, they can read and write, they know what they're going to fill in, and therefore they should be okay. But I think sometimes it's a little bit, whether it's us as professionals or schools or what have you, a bit ignorant of us to even think that actually let's just leave that parent to do it on their own. Just because they can speak and write English doesn't mean that they are experiencing things the same, and what for them their normal is different to everybody else's normal, as mine would be too.
Yeah, definitely. And we are putting, as I say, as part of the while waiting to be allocated for an EP, we are putting on meetings for parents. So if they're thinking of applying for an education, health and care plan, or the school have discussed it with them, we invite them along to a meeting to ask questions and support our parent care reform as a part of that as well, and they support us with that as well. So those information sessions we also do around annual reviews as well, and they've been quite successful in terms of just making sure parents and carers are supported and know about the process, which is difficult to navigate sometimes. I appreciate,
Just one final thing, it'd be interesting to kind of see sort of figures in terms of what those initial assessment numbers look like, and how many of those get sort of turned down, i.e. don't progress further, but come back to us at a later time, so that we can at least see where there are gaps in where we are perhaps missing or not capturing the information we need to capture in that initial assessment, so that we can perhaps improve the way that we capture the information initially in the first place. So it'd be nice to have a bit of data around that in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Connor, I had you next, but was that your point of order? Yeah. Okay, so moving on to Mark Mailer, secondary school representative.
Evening, everyone, and thank you for the report. Very informative. Totally concur. More of a comment rather than a question. It's Paul. I'm very happy to hear that part of your strategic move forward is the backdating of any funding. But my comment really is, I mean, schools have received their gag statements for the next academic year, so funding basically, and it's ever increasingly under strain. It's a pretty bleak future we're looking at for the next few years, at least, I would say. And many head teachers up and down the line at Land are having to rationalise their staffing structures, restructure, which is basically a euphemism for cutting back, because that is the greatest impact you can have on school budgets. And while we are backdating the support that's been put in place, the school has to front load that cost and bear the brunt from the outset. And, we're looking at up to a year in terms of some of the HCPs being granted. So there's an awful lot of time where the school is having to support individual students without necessarily receiving the financial support for that. So it's more of a point of comment that schools are increasingly coming under strain to meet the demands of the increasing number of students who have additional needs. And again, while I do welcome the fact that there will be backdating, I just wanted to make a clear point that schools are having to put up the initial financial burden of that.
Thank you. Any others? Sorry, did somebody want to come in on? Oh. Councillor Edries, yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Joe, for the report. I just want to go to page 18.12, clearing the backlog. Just a little bit sort of concerned that the outside agency that you commissioned, obviously welcome that that's happened. They're going to be under similar pressures as well, and what plans are in place if they don't clear the backlog in 4 months' time? Is there a plan B? Because it's going to be difficult for them to do that as well. Obviously, they're going to be under the same pressures that nationally we're under.
Backlog, sorry, based on we've commissioned the number that we need to clear the backlog. We're already seeing, as I say, the number of cases over to allocate today means that we're making headrows into that. I think we had about 80 young people waiting. That's significantly reduced now. So using the agencies, we should be able to clear the backlog. As I say, they're all obviously we're quality assuring all of the work that they do for us as well. So I'm quite confident it has been used. That model has been used in other local authorities just recently. In Milton Keynes, the same agency have managed to clear their backlog within timescales as well. So we've been very clear in terms of the ask, the quality of the EPs that we need, and I'm quite confident that they will be able to deliver on that. So hopefully that's. status quo. We've been through obviously a detailed period of procurement just to make sure that we've got, you know, the right quality, the right checks in place, and we're making sure that obviously we can get that done in time. They will have to complete it within 4 weeks, and provide us with that advice so we can finalise.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No. Okay. Thank you. So the recommendation is as stated on page 15 under paragraphs 3 and 4. I'm happy with those recommendations. Are there any dissenting voices? No. Good. Okay. Thank you for again your report and covering the questions raised. Right. So moving on to the next item, which is item number 9, and that's the education performance of different groups for 2024. That's on pages 23 to 52 of your agenda pack. And over to Paul Wagstaff, Director of Education.
Thank you very much. Obviously, we report on the outcomes for young people, both at the Key Stage 2 and at early years, and also at GCSE every year. Every time we come to the March, we then come forward with a report which looks at the ethnicity of the different groups of pupils. The reason the two reports are separate is because we don't get that detailed breakdown from the national government until around March, April time. This particular report throws a lens on the different groups we have within Luton, and it's only the second time I think we've had such a report, and it is quite interesting to look because actually the numbers who are going through assessment and examination sort of year groups do vary year on year, so therefore it's difficult sometimes to look at a pattern because actually the number of children within a particular group one year may be significantly different to the same group the following year. But I'm going to pass over to my colleague Caroline Dawes, who's going to summarise the report, and then we'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Paul. Hi everyone, nice to be here. I'm Caroline Dawes, Head of Standards and Effectiveness in Education. So as Paul said, this is following on from the meeting that we had in the autumn, where we looked at overall achievement, and this report looks at educational achievement of different groups. So some key points. So we know that around 93% of children attend good and outstanding schools in Luton, but we know that that doesn't always translate into high attainment of different groups. But we've got high expectations of all pupils, and so we're committed to ensuring that all groups achieve highly. Now, you'll have read the outcomes in the report, and we can go through some questions later, but I think I wanted to focus perhaps a bit more on the actions and the impact of those actions, particularly since I came this time last year and you approved actions that we were going to take. So following this report last year, we had a workshop with primary heads discussing a forensic approach to ensuring all pupils achieve, particularly around different ethnic groups, in the same way that they've successfully done with disadvantaged children, because we know that disadvantaged children do better in Luton than disadvantaged children nationally at all key stages. And then this year at Key Stage 2, we had a big uplift in the outcomes for Black Caribbean pupils. So our Black Caribbean pupils at Key Stage 2 performed 10 percentage points above Black Caribbean pupils nationally, and indeed above the average for Luton for all pupils. Last year, we sent the data to schools following approval from this group, showing the 3-year trend around ethnicity data and the gaps between their ethnic groups and ethnic groups nationally. This year, we're looking to send the data to schools again, as well as with trustees and governors, showing that 3-year trend and the gaps. In addition, for secondary schools, we'll be highlighting any lack of improvement or lack of movement from the previous year, and really reiterating that clear expectation that schools implement initiatives to address those gaps. I think it's also an opportunity for us to highlight with secondary schools that their Year 7 cohort, the Black Caribbean pupils in their Year 7 cohort, are coming in on average above the Luton average for all pupils, to raise those expectations really, really explicitly. So other actions we're looking to do this year, we're looking at the differences between schools. with the same ethnic groups to understand approaches which are working well and to be able to share them more widely and put schools in touch with each other. We've targeted and identified individual schools to participate in long-term sustainable strategies based on high expectations, quality teaching and focused monitoring of children in underachieving groups, so we can help support schools to have high achievement, to support high achievement irrespective of children's starting points. So that underachievement is not embedded. We're establishing an annual, we've had one, so I can call it an annual one. Now we're going to have a second one, Standards and Equalities Workshop, but we're broadening out the audience. So it's not just schools. So we'll be including representatives from community groups so that we can support a wider strategic approach to raising achievement of different groups through, for example, mentorship, supplementary schools, and so on. We're going to intervene in maintained schools with persistent differences in achievement of ethnic groups over time through our causing concern categories through the local authority. And we'll include matching less successful schools with more successful schools to really have that targeted school-to-school support. And more broadly, we've shared the findings around the differences in educational attainment with our colleagues in SEND and inclusion and in children's services more widely, to start encouraging a more system-wide approach in terms of differences within ethnicity, for example, in engagement with different levels of social care. But all these actions are going to be framed within the Education and Learning Strategy Reset Plan and monitored in relation to implementation and impact of those actions by the governance board of the Strategy Reset Plan. And then progress reports will come through to this group on a regular basis as part of that reporting process. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Member to say?
Thank you. I don't introduce you, introduced me already. Thank you, Caroline. Can I just ask you, in terms of the report is very comprehensive and it gives a detail of each ethnic group. Now, either we can spend the whole evening or all years or many years that I've spent, I'm going back 40 years when I was sitting at a Beach Hill school and the head teacher and the governing body, I asked, why are we not performing well? And she said, well, English is an additional language. I said, well, that's no excuse. So at long last, 40 years later, EAL is no longer an excuse because EAL children are doing better than most children in an average in the school. So if I can concentrate on the couple of things which we have spent over many years, is that whichever school that we look at, some of our schools are very outstanding, which is probably, say, one example is Downside, nearly 1,000 or more kids in there. Majority of the children are doing very well. In a similar school down the road is not, yeah? And yet the intake of those schools is exactly the same. Or bottom of the Delaware Road is not doing as well as the top of Delaware Road. So can you tell me, in your professional opinion, what is it that we need to do that all schools can improve, perhaps in a same way? And I've got a number of questions, if you allow me, Chair.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. If we had the answer to that, that would make our job in school improvement much easier. But I think it's important to separate out the exam results, which are a headline figure for a limited number of subjects, and the overall quality of provision that a school provides. Because you can have two schools which have got very different outcomes in terms of headline published figures, but actually who are both very strong schools. In fact, all the schools that you'd mentioned, all of our schools are good and outstanding in Luton. So it is complex. But similarly, we need to be cautious that we don't build in unintended consequences. So we've got lots of children coming into schools with varying levels of English, with varying levels of length of time in the country. We wouldn't want to be putting off schools from welcoming those children with open arms. Similarly, increasing numbers of children with SEND coming through. And again, we really wouldn't want to be encouraging schools to be reducing the extent to which they welcome those children. I think also it's quite interesting to think about the different sizes of schools. So when you've got a large school, variations in terms of outcomes are not quite so significant. Much smaller schools, they swing much more. But it's a complicated picture, which is why I think it's important when we look at the Ofsted judgments, for example, that they cover a really wide range of provision and outcomes in terms of those key stage figures at the end of key stage 2, for example, looking at just reading, writing and maths are not the whole picture.
Question really is an obvious one that I've asked you so many times, is that serious concern is in terms of white working class children, nationally as well as locally. That they start up reasonably well, and as they go into each stage 4, they tend to really drop out. Now, what is it that we need to do that can improve those results, because the consequences of that could be very serious in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. The white British group is underachieving, is one of our lowest performing groups persistently and consistently, and needs to be addressed. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. And so these actions that we're proposing are really around having a really forensic approach around the achievement of children in different groups. So that if you're focusing on white British pupils, that actually you're looking at the planning for those pupils, you're looking at the books of those pupils, you're monitoring their attainment in a very strategic and targeted way. In the same way, because schools have done this successfully by looking at children on free school meals in a systematic, strategic way, and that's had really strong outcomes. So schools are able to then apply those same forensic approaches to monitoring focus groups of children to be able to improve the outcomes of white British pupils. It's a real challenge. It is a real challenge, but I think we're not shying away from it. And I think actually publishing the data, shining a light on it, sharing it with head teachers, with governors and with trustees, is not a passive act. I think when people start looking at it, things happen, things change. So sharing the data systematically, clearly, in the same way each year is not a passive act. It really shines a light on these groups, which are really underachieving in a way that is completely unacceptable. We're all on the same page with that.
Paul wants to come in. Paul, before you come in, can I just say that there are a number of local authorities where the evidence is that those children that were not, Manchester is one of those, they have managed to get this. So couldn't we, learn something? How did they manage to do it? And what do we need to do it locally here? Yeah?
Yeah.
I think Wagstaff, Director of Education.
Yeah, it's just picking up on that. I think that's part of the plan, is actually looking at best practice and also looking at best practice across the schools in Luton, because some schools do extremely well with certain groups and we want to understand what they're doing that actually is making that difference. But I think it's quite important to note that actually learning that takes place, our schools and our teachers and heads and leaders work extremely hard to make sure that every day matters for every child. Some of the outcomes and some of this learning is not always just about what's going on in school. It's that broader cultural sort of ethos around the child, about how their propensity for wanting to learn, the kind of support mechanism from outside within the community. And some of these community groups, and it's something we need to explore, may very well have a much stronger support network outside the school. And I think that's why Caroline's tried to explain about the potential of looking at the role of supplementary schools, looking at the community as well, because all that joins together to help young people achieve their ambitions. So it goes beyond the school. And I think what we're trying to do is to think, right, let's shine a light on this, but we need to look wider to see what else can be done.
I think that I agree with you 100%. When Denby High School was a failing school many years ago, but 15, 20 years with the leadership it had, it managed to get 100% A to C grade. And my challenge was to every school, if they can do it in the most deprived area of the town, why can't you? and wasn't very popular with the teaching staff. But that's my challenge to this day, that we can do it. If one school can do it, every school can do it. There's no excuse for it.
Councillor Begum.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask, what is or is there a correlation between the number of EHCP plans that come through with these sorts of results and those people that are waiting? So obviously my fellow councillor was talking about the transition between Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 4. Why does that attainment drop? Is it because people are still waiting for answers in terms of, do I have a learning need, do I not? Just last week, just as we were actually about to sit a mock exam for one of my students, and this is in a college setting, could see her struggles, put her through a preliminary test to see whether there was any sort of dyslexia, ADHD, and she actually scored quite high. So obviously now she has an answer, but she's been through all her schooling life struggling and not knowing why she herself just didn't. She understood the content, and I know that she did understand the content because, like, verbally she could tell it. She could tell you everything that there is to know. But when it came to writing and comprehension, that was totally a different ballgame. So again, what is the kind of correlation between, because not everybody has needs to have a severe sort of EHCP plan in place. It could be just things like managing their, I don't know. I mean, I'm quite a bouncy person, to say the least, in the sense that I fidget quite a bit, but everyone's got their own coping mechanisms. We shouldn't I just want to know what the correlation is between this in terms of what we've discussed about people being assessed and having answers to why they are the way that they are and why their normal is different to other people's normal. And how does that kind of translate into results? Because we do at college see a lot of students come through our doors that have had sort of missed opportunities, things that have been missed, or they've been labelled as the wrong, as the naughty child. I do not blame schools at all because, again, they are overloaded. And if you've got all these EHCP students coming in, it's really hard to focus on those that might be borderline or might not have a sort of a label attached to them just yet, but you can see that there are traits and things like that. And that could be one of the reasons why we're seeing that there is sort of these figures where they're doing quite well to a certain point. And how does puberty, again, the psychological theories in that sense, we would say that during that time, that's the pivotal time for a young person in terms of development, where the brain goes through a lot of development in terms of pruning what they don't need and what they do retain. And how does that affect them in terms of their behavior, and how does that result in attainment? So there is obviously, for me anyway, it just seems that there is an obvious correlation between those two areas. But what are we going to do to manage that? And how do we kind of support young people to get the best out of what they need to do so that they can get better results for the future and reach their goals?
Thank you. Yeah, so I think broadly speaking, if you've got a school with a very high number of children with EHCPs and who are on SEN support, then you might expect their headline figures to be slightly lower, as just as headlines. But I think the important thing in our schools, which our schools are really strong on and are very, very good, which is reflected in Ofsted reports, is actually around the inclusive practice that they have. So actually, it's not about waiting for a label. It's not about labels at all. It's not about diagnosis at all. It's around what are the individual needs of the children in the class that will enable that they need to meet in order to help them in their learning. And so it's as simple and as complicated as that from a teacher's point of view and from a SENCO and a head of department's point of view. What are the needs? Identify the needs accurately, meet the needs so that they can make progress, rather than, and I think this is a shift which some schools have made more rapidly than others, rather than having an adult, for example, helping that child do the work that everyone else is doing, for example. One of the things that we do find as children get older, which we hope meeting needs will reduce, is this idea that actually the scaffolding that they get as they go through the school system reduces, which means that when we're challenging primary schools, saying there's no need to have a teaching assistant with a child all of the time, because actually you're not helping them prepare for secondary school. And conversely, at secondary school, small groups, lots of support may not actually help them when they get to college. So there's something that we're really working with schools across the whole age range on, around that preparation for independence, preparation for adult life, so that actually when young people arrive at college, they're aware of their needs, they can advocate for themselves, and actually that they're not missed needs or unaddressed learning needs, but actually they're not, that they can cope with the reduction in scaffolding and support that they inevitably get when they come to a large college, for example.
Just one other thing, actually. Are we looking, like when we're looking at data in general, obviously we know that during COVID there was a lot of things that didn't happen that should have happened in terms of sort of where students perhaps didn't get the support that they needed or the level of support that they needed, and in terms of development as well. So I can only speak for my own experience in this particular case. Do we capture data in terms of where a child has perhaps had a delay in their learning, not because of them not having an EHCP plan in place, because they have conditions, but because they have physical ailments, i.e. eyesight issues that weren't picked up till much later, hearing issues that weren't picked up till much later? Are we capturing that sort of data? Because one of the things that I found is that my youngest is one of those that was supposed to start school, full-time education during COVID. Because of COVID, obviously, he was in for maybe a couple of months and then everything closed down. So his hearing issues, his sight issues, these things did not get picked up until he was in sort of middle of year 2, towards the end of year 2. And what didn't help was the fact that his teacher was a shielding person as well. So again, you're left with TAs and so on within the classroom, and therefore these things don't always get picked up. So is there perhaps, I think what will be interesting for future reference, really, to see if there is some data specific to that that's captured, so that we can see since that era or since that time, how have things progressed? Do we still have those sorts of issues where sight issues and hearing issues are not being addressed because of whatever reasons, because maybe parents miss their health visitor appointments, because of whatever reasons, that sort of thing. So is there a way that we can capture some of that data? Because that might answer, in terms of what my colleague was saying, that if Denbigh can be an outstanding school, why can't all the others? But do they have the same sort of issues as what one school has? That kind of thing. So it's just a point of interest for myself.
No, thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's really important not to forget the impact of COVID on our children and young people, and children in secondary school who missed out on all that important transition work from primary into secondary, and it's had huge impact. And we hear those reports very similar to that from head teachers all of the time. But I come back to actually our schools being really good at identifying need and meeting them. So schools that on return from COVID, there's no point trying to put children into classrooms and reading and writing. They need to build up their gross motor skills. We're going to buy playground equipment, and we're going to get more people doing more stuff outside. Climbing frames is what they need, not sitting down learning phonics. We can do that later, and they've got that development. So I think it's a really, really key point, and something we always need to bear in mind. On the plus side, we're seeing a less impact than we might have expected in terms of the outcomes, as you can see from the report, that despite the challenges around COVID, and despite the fact that Luton was impacted particularly hard, and different ethnic groups, again, disproportionately impacted by COVID. So these massive, sort of cumulative impacts, but actually the results are still improving. And we've narrowed that gap with national, which historically has been very embedded. So maybe if we hadn't had COVID, we'd be way top decile.
If I just pick up as well about the hearing impaired and visually impaired, we also have provision both in primary and secondary, where we have in-reach provision for children who need that specialist support, but they also provide outreach to individual cases that are picked up by schools. So if there was a case following COVID that was late in being actually diagnosed, that doesn't mean that they're not getting the support, because we're refreshing that list of people that are being supported, both at primary and secondary, both against hearing and visually impaired. And that's quite strong provision at the moment.
Thank you. Over to Mark Mailer, secondary school representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Caroline. Just really interesting, while we have the different groups here, if the data exists, or would it be possible to get the data where it further breaks it down on gender lines? So we can see the impact in terms of these different groups, whether we know nationally that girls outperform boys, but if there's a particular disparity according to these different groups. Now, obviously, I'm coming at from a lens of a head teacher of a boys' school, but it would provide very interesting context for me, given the national report that's come out regarding lost boys, and the particular challenges that boys are faced with regarding toxic masculinity, sense of identity, resilience, etc. We had the Gareth Southgate lecture recently, the Dimbleby lecture. So it really would be interesting to have, if the data does exist, broken down further along gender lines. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And it's great to have a secondary head here being represented. So we do have the gender data, but not by ethnicity. So I absolutely agree. And I think that's one of the messages that we're giving to schools, is that schools should be looking at those, if there's any difference in gender with ethnicity. Overall, though, in Luton, girls and boys at secondary are performing broadly in line with each other. There's only a 2 percentage point gap. So we've really narrowed that gap. That's a smaller gap than national. And that's because boys have improved rapidly. So thank you very much. And are now broadly in line with with national. And the girls are a little bit below national in secondary, which is different to the primary picture. So in primary, boys are underachieving by about 10 percentage points compared to girls. But that's really because girls are not overperforming, but they're above national. So girls leaving our primary schools are doing very, very well. And then that's not really sustained so much as they come through secondary. So there's some very interesting work to be done, I think, at secondary in terms of, is there a difference between girls of different ethnic groups? Is there a difference between boys of different ethnic groups? The challenge is around, well, our capacity in terms of doing that at that level and how useful it would be, whereas actually it's a really quite a school-specific thing. But I think it would be interesting. The other point that we bring up with schools is around deprivation or disadvantage and the intersection with ethnicity. So is there a protective factor in relation to disadvantage with some ethnic groups compared to others? So once you start digging into it, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. I've asked this group if they'd like to pay for me to do a PhD in this. I've not got a response properly yet.
Thank you. Just a question regarding the school level accountability. So, are MAT-led schools sort of bought into this, the idea of the brokered support? And for those that maybe aren't, is there a sort of a route of escalation beyond sort of the level of influence we have, maybe with the Department for Education or something like that?
Yeah, so all of our brokered support and signposted support is available to maintained and academies. We don't differentiate between them. And so similarly, when we target schools for that intervention and those initiatives, we include academies in that. And so lots of those academies really welcome it and are on board. And there's no difference between maintained schools and academies. In terms of multi-academy trusts, which are larger, they quite often have that capacity within their trust to address these. And we will be using our influence in terms of sharing the data with boards of trustees around this is what the schools are like, holding the heads to account and the CEO to account about making those differences. And so again, we shine a light on behalf of the children so that heads and MAT CEOs and trustees also have access to that. In addition, we hold schools to account through our influence, through the school monitoring panel, which we've brought here. So we allocate a category of concern stroke support to all schools, maintained schools and academies. And so if an academy is a category C or D, then I will meet with the CEO or their representative on a termly basis to feedback on the feedback from school monitoring panel, feedback on that challenge. And so I have in the past, and I will be doing again, bringing that ethnicity data and those gaps to those CEOs or directors of education to say, well, yeah, things look like they're going really well overall, but, you know, what about this? Or how are you sharing the practice within one school in your trust with another school in your trust? You know, when there's such differences, there can be so many such differences between schools in the same trust. So it's really again about shining a light on it. But you're right in that they're not accountable to the local authority, but the schools are accountable to the trustees. And so it's in the trust's interests to understand this intelligence. And so I think they, broadly speaking, really appreciate that level of conversation and that intelligence. It's not for them to then come back and tell us what they're doing about it, but we'd expect to see that obviously in the data coming through, because we'll still be persistently sharing the data with them.
Thank you. Ashish.
Yeah, so I've been a massive advocate for this level of data. It's more a point of governance, really. So one of the recommendations is that we need to agree to share the school level data. Why do we need to agree to share this school level data? Why isn't it just not a matter of course, a matter of practice?
So I felt, and this is from last year as well, that if some of the information is a bit contentious, I wanted this group to understand it first before it then went to schools, because then you might hear about it through governor meetings without having the sort of the due process going through.
Got it.
So it's more around getting the 2 thumbs up from this group to be able to share it.
Thank you. Sorry, Paul, did you want to come in on this? Oh, sorry, I wasn't sure whether you'd raise your hand. Okay, good. Okay, thanks. I don't see any other hands raised or anything. So, I think the recommendation is just to note the contents of the report, agree to sharing the school level data, and to support the proposals of the active challenge and targeting brokering and support for schools outlined in the actions. And again, I'm sure we're all supportive of that. I don't see any dissenting voices. So I think that's agreed. Thank you, Caroline and Paul. Thank you
very much.
So moving on to the final item of the agenda, agenda item 10, which is support with accommodation of Luton care leavers, which is on pages 53 to 59 of your agenda pack. I think that's with Marcella, is it? Yep, Marcella McHugh. Over to you, Marcella. Thank you.
Shall I just do?
Oh, sorry, Teresa, do you want to
That's
introduce?
it.
My apologies. If you could perhaps also introduce yourself for the those on the call as well. Thank you.
Teresa Hills, Director of Operations for Children's Services. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here. Just before I launch Marcella into it, I thought it would be helpful just to quickly highlight what our ask is. Firstly, to note the extension of council tax exemption for all our care leavers, especially those living outside of Luton, to review the effectiveness of housing pathways for our care leavers and provide scrutiny on any more possible improvements we can make within that, and also to consider the resource implications in terms of our enhanced local offer, and of course that has an impact on our council's budget. Nazakat from Housing has also come alongside, so if there are more questions as well in terms of some of the housing aspects, he's there on standby as well with Marcella. Over to you, Marcella.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Really pleased to be here to be able to talk to you about our care experienced young people. And as you will note, it's a really growing cohort in Luton. We've currently got 443 care experienced young people, which is more than our children in care now at the moment. And that's going to increase to 537 by in the next financial year. The paper takes you through the range of housing options available for our care leavers, and that includes social housing, which we work very closely with our housing colleagues to achieve. It also includes supported accommodation, which we commission, stay and put arrangements when our young people remain with our foster carers. Some private rented. Of course, there are challenges in terms of the cost of that. A small number, 42 of our children, about 10%, return to live with their family. And we have, again, a very small number of young adults with specific additional needs that live in supported living. We have a very clear pathway for our young people. So from the time just after their 16th birthday, we are preparing them for independent living, and we have a whole pathway to support them, including supporting with housing. And then once we think they are ready to have a tenancy, we have a panel where we address that with housing, and we support them to make that application, and continue to support them with their tenancy. And we have another panel if there are concerns or if anything is going wrong with that. What's also important to note is that working with our housing colleagues, they are currently taking a paper through the executive, which will be finalised in June, and that is to increase the allocations from band 2, which was a high housing need, to band 3, from band 3, which was a medium need, to band 2, which is the high housing need for our care leavers. So that increases their priority. As Teresa has also mentioned, we have enhanced our local offer. We have enhanced it in a number of areas within additional financial financial resources and the additional financial staffing resources. The area that impacts in terms of housing is that we have extended council tax exemption not only to children within Luton, but also children outside as well. And in terms of, just outlining some of the challenges, of course, we have limited availability of one-bedroom properties within Luton, so we are working within that. There are, as you know, increased financial costs in terms of private sector and renting within that. We also have the cost of living pressures for our care experienced young people, as every citizen of Luton is experiencing as well. So I will pause there and hand over to you for any questions.
Just an addition to note is that previously care leavers' age, the support was from 18 to 21. The extension also applies now through legal reasons as well. It has extended to 25, which also has an impact in terms of council and resources.
Thank you. Councillor Khan, and then we'll go to Councillor Fry, then Councillor Mahmood. Yeah.
I think I just have to say well done to the officers, because I know that Ofsted did a focus visit last year, and this was one of the areas which they said that we needed to sort of improve on. So actually, I want to say well done to the officers, but also to our portfolio holders, Councillor Umi Ali and Rob Roach, who worked with the officers collaboratively and came up with this policy of sort of increasing the banding priority for care leavers. And I think that's really positive. And I think it is showing that we are taking positive steps to sort of mitigate some of the problems that were presented within that report. So that's all I have to say. And I just want to ask that maybe in the future, once this is implemented and rolled out, if we can maybe get a report back on how well that's working and whether it's been effective. Thank you.
Councillor Fry.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a small point, which shows the quality of the report, really, I think. On page 57, which is item 31 on leaving care grant, it said the grant is administered flexibly. I just wanted to know how that process works. Obviously, they've got things like rental deposits as well as food and furniture, etc. You know, do they get it all at once, or do they have to wait over a year? Just a little bit more clarity would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. So yes, so in terms of the Leaving Care grant, so the personal advisors support our young people in terms of, so we assess the need, we identify what they need. A lot of that tends to be white goods. We purchase that through Argos, but also in terms of any money we give, we're continuously supporting with budgeting and meeting those needs. I suppose the other thing, and Naz, thank you for joining me at the table, is in relation to private rented. Our housing colleagues really help and support with that in terms of deposits and support with rent as well.
Sorry, I'm Nazakat Ali, Head of Housing Needs at Luton. So I'll just add to that obviously it's very difficult to access the private rented sector. As most of you most probably know here, it's very, very challenging. So we're working very closely with our colleagues in Children's Services, and what we offer is we'll offer to pay a deposit, we'll offer to pay a rent, and we'll also offer to pay a shortfall to cover any shortfall of rent between universal credit or housing benefit and the actual rent. So that really then helps a young person to secure that tenancy. And then our colleagues in Children's Services will work with that young person for that tenancy period, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, to see what other solutions they can come up with.
Thank you. Councillor Mahmood Hussain.
Can I ask you, I can't see it here, any of the new build, if this was agreed some time ago, that a number of them would be prioritized for the care leaver, is that implemented? Is that now in place?
I think what we had prior to this Ofsted is that we agreed that we would accommodate 30 care leavers in the last financial year through our housing register, and that was through a number of different schemes that came up. So we managed to accommodate 28 in the last financial year, but I don't have a breakdown of whether they were new developments or old stock. But this year we've changed it from when we get executive approval that they'll be going to band 2, so they can apply for any property that is advertised in band 2.
Right. My second question is the children or young people that are in custody. In terms of the care leaver, obviously, when they come out of prison, they had lost because of the period that they've been inside, they tend to lose their property. Is that, some sort of arrangements are so that by the time they're released, that they do have somewhere to live, yeah?
Yes, that's a really good question, and we are doing a lot of work with our young people that are in custody, making sure that that they are engaged in any type of employment and training activity while they're in custody. We're supporting them around that preparation for when they come out and their independent living skills, and really thinking about their housing options when they are to be released. And I think some of the challenges we've had historically has been about our communication with secure estates in terms of early release dates. But we've done a lot of work to improve that so that we're being notified much quicker if there's any early release dates, so we're not left basically without having, because we've already had plans in place, and if without a surprise basically in terms of that. Yeah,
because they're obviously very vulnerable, and the last thing we want them is to go back to prison if they get into a problem. So that would be, our serious concern. Thank you.
Councillor Begum.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. First of all, I want to ask Teresa, where you were saying that the care leaver age has been raised from 21 to 25. When raised from? And was it following a process? And do you expect it to go up again at all by any chance?
We don't expect it to go up, no, but it was raised a few years ago. However, in terms of it's slightly nuanced because of the impact of education, etc., etc. So the expectation is that our offer as corporate parents extends fully up till the age of 25. What we see in terms of practice is often that age group of 21 to 25 may not really want to engage or be connected to us. But what we have to be able to show that we are impartial and we are extending that offer fully to our up to 25, that we are actively reaching out to our children in care who have grown out of our care to say, hey, we are thinking of you, and evidencing that. So it might be that some of them have dropped off, don't want to stay in touch with us. Naturally, some kids, they've moved on. They really don't want us to be involved in their lives. So they've moved on, but they have the choice then to engage or not. But we don't envisage this to change. Good practice, best practice is where we don't allow young people to experience the cliff edge. So where they turn 18 and it's a cliff edge, or where they turn 25 and it's a cliff edge. So that transition, if there is some good transition between adult services and us, or between 18 plus services and the under 18, and there sometimes for some kids, for some complex vulnerabilities, you want to see a bit of a tag team, that there is a period where there's two sides working closely together, because then there's that continuity and these kids then don't fall through the gap. So if we can evidence that, if we can be an authority that's showing that, then our children aren't falling through the gaps. That's what we want to get to.
So that actually leads on to my next question, and that's to all of you because it's relating to sort of council tax and things like that. So, for example, you've got a young person approaching their 25th birthday, is used to having that level of support in terms of that extra bit of funding that they can get, or the exemption that they get for the council tax. How are you supporting them to kind of come away from that? Because some, depending on where you live and what property you're in, that could be thousands of pounds a year. So again, how are we kind of supporting them to expect that, so that they don't experience that cliff edge in terms of, oh my God, now this, from the coming year, April onwards, my cost of living is going to go up considerably because I've got to factor in, I've got to pay, I don't know, £200 a month in council tax. So is there a way that we are kind of helping them come off that support perhaps, or get used to the idea that this is going to be an additional cost to them? And are they able to sort of manage and factor that extra bit of finance and expense into their sort of budget overall?
Thank you. Again, another really important question, and that's part of our ongoing work from 16 upwards, which is a really important part of preparation for adulthood. And and I suppose one of the aspects is, our children that are in care have a much harsher reality than our children in our families, because they have to learn those independent living skills from a very young age, and it's constantly under review. And what we really try to do is to make sure that we're not setting up any of our young people for failure. So that's why we do a lot of assessment work before we give them the letters to get to apply for their tenancies. Obviously, there are some young people that will go through dips, as any young people do, and that's why we have the processes and the panels in place to review that. And clearly, there is a small percentage where it doesn't work, even despite all of that support.
It'd be good for the future sort of thing if you can sort of keep track and monitor in terms of figures as well, that data. If we could capture that data, that would be good. The last question that I had is, for example, if you've got a young person that decides to go back to their family, are we still supporting them with that council tax exemption? Or because they're going to live with their family, do they not get any support? Because obviously sometimes your council tax can change depending on who's living in there, how old they are, and so on. And therefore, a family might think, or even where you've got sort of like if they're going back to live with friends for a short period of time, they might say, well, actually, you know what, I don't want you because it means that I'm going to have to pay more. Even if you're going to help me pay this, it's still not going to cover the full cost of what I'm going to face. So therefore, sorry, goodbye, but I don't really want you staying here. So how are we going to support those families? So that obviously the best place for that young person is with family, and we would always advocate for that. But how are we going to support the family as well as the young person?
Yeah, again, that's a really important aspect. So in terms of council tax per se, we haven't been doing that for the children that are at home with family. But what we do look at is the support and offer that's available, and making sure that that financial difficulties wouldn't prevent them from remaining there. So it's more of a wider assessment of need rather than specifically saying, you know, you're still going to get this, this, and this.
Councillor Alia Khan.
Thank you. It's just a quick one. And it goes back to the point where Councillor Mahmood Hussain made around new builds. Now, in Luton, we have a developing local plan. Are we working with our planning colleagues to ensure that there is actual policy written around that maybe a certain set percentage can be of new builds of social houses in particular are put aside for our care leavers? And I know that the government's keen to have more social homes built. That is part of their mission statements, but also they've sort of said that a lot of it can, you know, priority will be given to domestic violence victims and veterans. But can we in Luton, within our local plan, include a little section or a set percentage so that a certain amount can go to care leavers? So I think there's a conversation worth having with some of our planning colleagues who are working on that.
Yeah, I think from a housing point of view, I mean, just to give you some context, we don't get a lot of properties become empty. So on average, we get about just over 500 properties becoming available a year. We've got 11,000 people on the housing register. And as a rough estimate, on one beds, we get about 100 a year. And then if you look at it, we've got so many different cohorts to give that one bed to. So we've got care leavers, we've got other single vulnerables, we've got some elderly people that may not meet sheltered accommodation. So I think it would be hard to just give a quota to care leavers. So the way we do it in our banding and our allocation is anybody on band 2, where care leavers will be, they can actually bid for that property. And it will be given to the person whose application date is the oldest. And I think that is the fairest way to do it.
Thank you. I think Teresa, I think Teresa wanted to come in on that as well.
Councillor Khan, I think that's a very fair challenge, and there's no reason why we can't have the conversation, and we can definitely take that up with our planning colleagues, because I know that in the last meeting there was that appetite to look at that, and so there's no reason why we can't have that conversation and look into it and see what is within the art of the possible. So that's a fair challenge. We'll take that away.
Thank you. And just to come back to Nazaka, I completely understand the challenges, completely understand we have to be fair in the process. But I think they are a protected characteristics, and this council does recognise them as a protected characteristic. So I think, like I said, completely understand the challenges, but maybe there is a way where it can work, and that's where our planning officers can come in and sort of support us with that.
Yeah, I mean, like Teresa said, we can certainly look at that, because we are looking to review our allocation policy as well in this financial year. So if we can do that, then we can include it in that.
Councillor Mahmood Hussain, you had another question?
Point of clarification, I think if you dig out some of the executive paper, this was agreed 5 years ago, a protocol, that would be the case, and that they would be given priority. I was one of those signatories with Tom Shaw.
Thank you, no problem. I'll go back and look at that.
Councillor Fry?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just off the back of the conversations going on about the housing. How many, if at all, of our care leavers then are in temporary accommodation?
Very good question. I could get you that figure. I can certainly get that figure for you, but I wouldn't have that figure right now available.
Yeah, yes, please, if you could give us a written response on that, that'd be great.
Along with that, it'd be really good if we could see how many are in support and accommodation as well, so supported, assisted.
I could give you some figures on some of that now. So in terms of supported accommodation, we have 135 care leavers currently in that, and out of that 135, 32 are in solo flats, preparing them for independent living. Just in relation to that other point you raised, which was the number of young people that are not in suitable accommodation. So we have the 14 young people that are in custody, and we have an additional 25 young people that won't disclose their address to us. And a proportion of those are separated migrant children that have lost their asylum claim. So they have lost touch with us.
And just to go further on that data set, you may not have it to hand, but I know that supported accommodation, often there's a 2-year lease or a 3-year or a 5-year lease. How many are actually leaving a lot sooner and finding their own accommodation, and how many are actually staying for the full tenure and extending as well?
Thanks. Yeah, so sorry, just to mention, I don't think you had your microphone on, so you don't have that information to hand, but you'd be able to provide that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Just one question that I have. So in paragraph 37, also you mentioned that the current housing options for care leavers are under review, and there'll be a cost benefit analysis of providing support accommodation directly and through commission service. And then apologies if you covered this in your oral presentation, but what are the timelines for that, please? Okay.
So the review is underway. The timelines are just in terms of actually being able to go out to a commissioning process. We're hoping to be able to do that within the next 3 months.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? No? Okay, thank you. And again, I think Teresa quite summarised the recommendations. So I think we all covered and in agreement with that. No dissenting voices. So the final item. So thank you. Thank you for your report and for covering our questions. That's been great. We'll move on to the final item of the agenda, which is the item 11, which is the draft work programme. Obviously, again, it's the end of the municipal year, so there's only so far ahead that obviously we can plan. But we've put some proposed items in place for at least the initial upcoming meetings, and we can add to that as we progress. So I'm sure that we don't need to debate that at length here. But if anybody has anything that they would like to add to that work plan, then please do let me know as chair, and we can look at adding those in. And on that bombshell, I think we can finish. Thanks, everyone.